Hello everyone, welcome to the Bigger Picture, O'Connor and Weatherall, Part 3. Hope everybody's safe and healthy, hope your loved ones are too. I will be linking to this in the description for this video, and I will also be linking to this in the media sharing forum. This is an article from the Boston Review, Hydroxychloroquine and the Political Polarization of Science. So the authors here, O'Connor and Weatherall, in this article, they're talking about a lot of the things that we've already been talking about. They're talking about polarization of scientific beliefs. So looking specifically at hydroxychloroquine as an example here, I'm just going to be reading directly. I think the authors write pretty well, so I'll just be reading directly from this. So we have an underdeveloped area of scientific research and development. No matter how you slice it, this is an experimental treatment for a novel coronavirus that is still not fully understood. All this means that there is a huge amount of information circulating that has some scientific legitimacy, but that may be dramatically underdeveloped and more likely than normal scientific findings to be overturned. Claims about hydroxychloroquine fall into this category, right? So this is just an underdeveloped area of science. Okay. So there is what the authors call legitimate uncertainty. I'm just reading from a little bit lower from where I was before. This legitimate uncertainty means that pundits and journalists who treat claims supporting hydroxychloroquine as akin to typical misinformation or radical conspiracy theories are misdiagnosing the situation. Trumpeting hydroxychloroquine is undoubtedly risky, both because current evidence is too mixed to support that claim and because it can lead to problems like drug hoarding. But sharing anecdotal accounts of the success of hydroxychloroquine in various clinical settings is not necessarily misinformation, and neither is sharing information about failed clinical trials or shortages for patients who need the drug for other purposes. These are all pieces of evidence that should inform any reasonable person's belief about hydroxychloroquine and COVID-19. So the authors then go on to talk about how selective sharing, as they call it in this book, but sharing an isolated truth is just as bad as sharing a falsehood when it comes to conveying misinformation, right? You want to be looking at the whole truth. Unfortunately, even scientists are oftentimes motivated by this conformity bias that drives them to agree with influential figures who think like them on other kinds of issues that may be completely unrelated causally. But as the authors show, when you look at networks or cliques of scientists or communities of knowledge builders, when you're looking at more than just one issue, when you're looking at, like, say, two different issues, you notice that responses to different issues tend to correlate very highly, right? So these are the kinds of social signals that influence people's beliefs, right? So I'm more likely to believe something if people who I agree with on another issue also think the same way about this. Okay, so this might seem like a very dire kind of a diagnosis of our species, right? They are coming at it from this sort of the mathematical modeling side, but also this sort of, broadly speaking, what I would call this sort of philosophy of biology, right? Like, we are a social species. We are driven by social concerns. And this is just the last article where it's a little bit more hopeful, or at least they give a little bit of recommendation to the reader for how to deal with this polarization. There are no easy solutions to polarization writ large. Telling journalists not to report on extreme events is hopeless, though we might do well to call for more nuanced and contextualized reporting, telling the whole truth rather than some isolated part of it. Politicians, for their part, have plenty of incentives for playing up polarization, but individuals, including physicians and others whose expertise we rely on, can resist by attempting to recognize the ways that their own belief factions may be distorting the evidence they see and trust. perhaps more importantly, we must recognize that not everything shared or believed by those with whom we disagree is misinformation, even if it later turns out to have been false. All right, so this is sort of going back to the idea that even if we're operating with no propagandists and everybody who sincerely wants a scientific consensus around the better option, we can still end up with high polarization because of things like trust and conformity bias. So thinking about individuals like us, the general population, but also thinking about physicians, right? Stepping back and attempting to recognize that your own belief factions may be distorting the evidence they see and trust. We all belong to communities or factions or networks, so we ought to be recognizing the ways in which our own factions may be distorting evidence that is being shared widely, including on social media, which we'll be talking about explicitly on Thursday. Take care, everybody, and I will see you on Thursday.